So I went back to Berkeley and scribbled down this formula in 1965, essentially the concept that prosperity, job creation, needs access to financial capital, all forms of financial capital, to serve as a multiplier on the world's largest asset that George has written about and spoken about, and that's the ability of individuals, their knowledge, human capital. And Gary Becker won a Nobel Prize in '92 for this concept, that somewhere between 75% and 90% of all the value of assets is the productivity of individuals. It is estimated conservatively today that the human capital quantitative measurement in the United States would be around 1,500 trillion. But it was my view in studying that we needed to provide access to capital for individuals to put their ideas into motion. The second largest asset is social capital. And the asset that you see on balance sheets, cash, accounts receivable, inventories, makes up a very small part of the real assets of any country. And so as I looked at this issue, I started studying credit in '65 at Berkeley, and I was 19 years old, and within 3 months, my conclusion was every single thing that the head of the Federal Reserve and the Secretary of the Treasury and everything you were taught in school was wrong. And all you had to do was look at the facts. There was a book written by a man named Heckman. He studied every single bond issued from 1900 and 1944 through the Depression, and it showed what were the best credits, what were the worst, what was the highest rate of return. And during the Depression, the highest rate of return was still what we would call non-investment grade debt. There's about 500 companies today in America that are investment grade and about 15 million that aren't. And so the explosion of financial technologies that we focused on during this period of time, once you with ability had access to capital, you could see what occurred in the last 30 years of the 20th century, where 62 million jobs were created in the private sector by small and medium growing companies, and minus 4 million were created by large companies once those companies had access to capital to compete. People that became legends, entrepreneurs that I had a chance to finance, of the 1,000 of them became household names. And I thought, we're here in this subjects today, I'd start with Bill McGowan. So when I first met Bill McGowan, he had about 30 employees. George had written about fiber optics at the time. AT&T had 1.4 million employees, but Bill's challenge was, would anyone loan him money? And if you loaned money to MCI, you were blackballed by the world's largest payer of fees, AT&T. But it was only 3 years after we began to provide capital to Bill that AT&T was broken up. And the cost of a long-distance call, many of you in the audience might not remember, but it was $12 a minute when salaries were $100 a week. So not a lot of people were making long-distance calls. Today, with technology, they're down to 0. There was another revolution that occurred about 3 or 4 years ago, and that was eventually what I saw as the same effort of MCI to revolutionize telecom as we know it. And that was the combination of a company called Sprint that was starved for capital, but had capacity with T-Mobile. And this is the performance, if you look at T-Mobile with the combination of Sprint versus AT&T and Verizon, and the merger of an extremely aggressive company, now that had the largest spectrum of T-Mobile, caused Verizon and AT&T to eventually have to compete. And as you've seen over the last 3 to 4 years, As a result, they had to sell almost all the acquisitions they made, and so AT&T sold Direct, AT&T sold Time Warner, Verizon sold AOL, Yahoo, and so on. But this is what happens when you have aggressive people with new ideas getting access to capital. But we're here in Seattle, and I see a few of you might be as old as I am and might remember this sign in Seattle. And this sign was, "Will the last person leaving Seattle please turn out the lights?" And why was this occurring? A company which we had financed, Boeing, decided to move its headquarters and reduced its employment in 6 years by 60%. But Seattle never missed a beat, greatly due to 4 entrepreneurs that chose to live in this city: Bill Gates and Paul Allen, Howard Schultz, Craig McCaw, and Jeff Bezos. And so they didn't have to turn the lights on in Seattle. Seattle turned the lights on, and it's dramatically different today. But I want to come back again to one of those 4 individuals, Craig McCaw. So AT&T invented, and this isn't your AT&T today because AT&T is really Southwest Bell that acquired AT&T. But AT&T developed the technology for mobile. And they had a report, and they brought McKinsey in at the end of the 1970s. And the McKinsey report said that by the year 2000, there would be 900,000 users of cell phones on the planet. And so AT&T did not decide at that time not to go into the industry they invented. Well, they were a little off in their projections, as you all know, and by the year 2000, they were selling 900,000 a day at one point at that time. And so today there are slightly more mobile phones on the planet than humans, over 8 billion of them. And this young man in Seattle, Craig McCaw, that I had an opportunity to visit, no one would loan him money for his crazy idea of investing in mobile technology. But over time, we became friends, and by the middle of the 80s, financed Craig, and he was the driving force in the mobile industry during that period of time. And by 93 and 94, AT&T decided to get back into the mobile industry and acquired a McCaw Cellular company. If you look at per capita income in the Seattle area, due to just a handful of entrepreneurs who changed the world, you'll see that it's among the highest in the United States and substantially above the per capita income in the country. So access to capital combined with what George would tell you is the most scarce resource, the ability and knowledge of people, changed the world, and it changed this part of the country.